Anyway, so for those who just arrived, I'm Paul Krofssik with Digital Watchdog, and today we're going to be talking about Digital Watchdog Blackjack servers with Linux OS, specifically about what we call the model our Cube LX, which is our small form factor model with Linux Ubuntu operating system on it, as opposed to Windows. And we're going to talk a little bit about Spectrum, about Linux, about setup of the unit, to give you a good overview of it. And it's also for those of you who encounter customers that don't want a Windows machine on their network, which there seem to be more and more of them coming around, and or just want an alternative that may cost less. It's a great alternative for you. So anyway, we're going to get started and get my mouse lined up here. We go. So the DW Cube LX comes preloaded with our latest version of DW Spectrum, which right now is 4.0. We will have a release sometime in August of 4.1, which will have some enhancement on it. We actually did a webinar, if you want to go back and look, which was our sneak peek of 4.1, what's going to be in it. Pretty interesting stuff. Preloaded, as I said before, with Linux operating system. This, like almost all our other servers, is dual NIC. So you have one Ethernet card for your camera network and one Ethernet for your corporate LAN remote connection internet network. It has an HDMI output. So optimal resolution is 1920 by 1080. I mean, you can plug a 4K monitor in it, but I would leave it at 1920 by 1080, just because of the speed of the machine and what you're doing. You'll get optimal performance out of it at 1920 by 1080. It's our smaller square form factor, up to 18 terabytes of storage, and this does not have to be special ordered. You don't have to wait. Many of our distributor branches have these in stock. They might not have the 18 terabyte, but they might have an 8 or a 12 on hand, and these are ready to ship either from California or our Tampa office. If they didn't have it on hand, we can ship it out. So again, these are, you know, ready to go items, and they come preloaded with 4 Spectrum camera licenses. So that means you can plug 4 cameras into this thing and start recording. And our licenses don't expire. You have to charge for a software update or the privilege of calling our tech support. So by all means, you know, you can do it. Now, if you use third-party cameras from other manufacturers, there are licenses to purchase. This machine, we have up to 16. I'm going to explain that a little more, why we say expandable up to 16. But if you use any of the Digital Watchdog cameras that are varifocal or specialty cameras, okay, so a camera, any IP camera with a 2.8 to something millimeter lens or 3.6 to something millimeter lens, any PTZ, any 360 camera, you will get the ability to use our Double Down program, which basically gives you a free license. So if you use all Digital Watchdog cameras, you don't have to worry about purchasing licenses. And if you did have 1 or 2 other manufacturer cameras on there, they can be covered by the 4 pre-installed licenses. So you can almost get down where you're not buying licenses, which is unusual for an enterprise VMS where everything's about the licenses and your yearly fees and the other stuff. So anyway, just kind of wanted to go over that small part with you. So getting into specs, we talk about maximum 2.1 millimeter or 1080p cameras, 16 of them at 30 frames a second. Now, here's the reason why we do this, is because the assumption is you're going to use this unit also for viewing cameras and displaying them, and displaying, you know, 4, 8, 16, you know, whatever, 10 cameras, whatever the display is. And so that's a function of how much of a load it is on the machine. Okay. If you were using this as just a server, not running the client, you can record more cameras on it safely. It'll just come eventually down to storage. You have 18 terabytes of storage, but recommended is 16 2 megapixel cameras. But if you had 16 4 megapixel cameras, it'll actually record them. I would just record them at a lower frame rate, which you probably would anyway in order to get the customer's hard drive space. I don't think I mentioned at the beginning, we'll have a Q&A at the end. So any questions on the Q&A, I know one popped in, I can't quite read it right now. I will answer them at the end. So this one is Intel i3 processor, 8 gig of RAM. I mentioned the dual mix. The reason why we also limit the cameras is internally, this one gets you about 80 megabits of storage, 80 megabits of throughput, okay? So between what's going on the network and writing to the hard drive. And so that's the other reason why we limit it. And so when you go to our calculator page on our website and calculate it out, you're going to see network bandwidth throughput on there. And, you'll say, oh, it's, 200 megabits. You may need a different machine to run that combination of cameras. 300-watt power supply, 5-year warranty. And down here, we'll talk a little bit about this more later, but UPS is highly recommended for optimal performance, cameras continuing to record and stuff like that. So what Linux OS is available on what items? So we have our ERAC, which is almost top of the line unit. I think you can store 400 terabytes in one of the models. That's 36 bay. We have our also smaller ones of those down to a 2U ERAC. They'll have RAID in them, and a lot of enterprise features, including dual power supply and stuff like that. We have our PRACs, which is our near enterprise items, and then of course the Cube LX, the Bolt, and the Mini all run Linux. Okay. Now we have also versions of the ERAC that also have Windows. We have the PRAC that also have Windows. We have a Cube that runs Windows, but the Bolt and the Cube LX is Linux, and the Mini is always Linux. Okay. We have a model called the X-Rack, which allows you to put 200 cameras on it. That one has to run Windows servers because of the way we're managing storage on it. And then, of course, we have our NAS boxes, which also are running a flavor of Linux on them. So, again, we're going to get into why Linux versus Windows in a little bit. But why you guys are using these products with Spectrum, it's open architecture cross-platform. So we've got Linux servers, we've got Windows servers, we've got Apple clients, we've got iOS clients, Android clients. Very easy to use interface. You guys, probably have used one of these at least once and installed one at least once, and the customers are very happy using this interface. For dealers and installers and end users, enterprise features are standard. We don't have a complicated model. You purchase the software, use the features you want to use. If you need an advanced feature, it's actually in there. If you want to use customer's LDAP, you want to manage 360 camera, stuff like that. It's all built in there. You don't have to buy any extra licenses or anything. Lifetime upgrades are included. Digital Watchdog has yet to charge for a software update, and scalable from 1 to 1,000 devices. If you want to revisit an earlier webinar, we have a product called CAS, which these are cameras that have the storage and Spectrum in it. So you can have one camera that is an enterprise level server software with up to 250 gigs of storage in it. That's where we get one from, and thousands of them. We have installations with upwards of 5,000 cameras on them, all being managed from a single interface in Spectrum. So again, super scalable, easy to use, and of course, we don't charge for software updates and annual agreements, and licensing when you use Digital Watchdog cameras is either very inexpensive or no cost. So we have applications for all major operating systems. There's no limit to how many devices you want. You can do a desktop, mobile device, low power embedded devices. And as you can see from the server, we have a cloud service that the client and the mobile talks to, and you can manage resources and users from the cloud interface. Okay, and we're going to be adding more to that cloud as time goes on. So by all means, I would tell you guys, if you have a unit either you're using for demo or you're a customer that is, you want to give them the best possible experience, attach their system to the DW cloud, let them use their email address as their login, and it will, just be a great experience an easier experience for them. One of the other things about Spectrum is we talk about open architecture cross platforms. We have huge integrations. We're actually, I think, up to 8,800 devices integrated. 500 plus manufacturers is actually an older slide. H.265, I/O modules, super high resolution cameras up to 48 megapixel, fisheyes, cameras with audios, encoders, all kinds of options that works with Spectrum. Comparing OSs, why would you choose Linux over Windows? One is the cost of the unit. The unit's going to cost a little extra because you're not paying for the Windows licensing. Viruses, very uncommon that there are attacks, whether they're phishing attacks or malware or whatever, written for Linux, specifically Ubuntu, which is it gets a Debian, what's called the Debian kernel in there. Whereas Windows, virus attacks are common. They're always writing exploits for it. Updates. Ubuntu, you can restrict updates just to security and vital programs only. Windows, especially Windows 10, they sometimes force you to do an update where the OS starts acting funny if you don't do the updates. And when you do the updates, the major changes are implemented that can mess stuff up, especially on a mission critical machine like a surveillance system. Programming, again, not a big deal to most of us, but programming for Ubuntu stuff and updates is very easy. Windows 10 is more complicated to create and maintain software. Ubuntu, we can have less hardware costs, meaning we can run it on 8 gigs of RAM versus Windows 10, you need 16 gigs of RAM minimum because of all the other Windows overhead in it. So there's DOS, there's legacy Windows NT, and older Windows code in order to support all that old software, which also leads to exploits. And again, there's minimal security threats. You can run a simple firewall on it, whereas Windows 10, you need to kind of have internal stuff, whether it's Windows Defender or some security software from someone, plus an external firewall to manage it from being exploited. So different management on it. I've noticed with Linux, you don't have to reboot them. Okay, you can have a Windows Linux machine running for 2 years. You never have to reboot it. I mean, Windows actually tells you, Windows Server, or the Windows client software, they like you to reboot it at least like once a month. So, keep that in mind too. So we're going to talk about this thing. So first we're going to see what's in the box. Very simple. We'll open this thing up. I'm not going to bore you with me doing it. So on here, I'm going to pause this a second. Come here, you. Pause. Here's all our different ports. We've got audio, because it'll actually support audio output. So if you have audio coming from the cameras, it'll actually play out of the unit. And if you have two-way audio, you can actually do two-way audio through Spectrum. But we've got a network card, and either one of these can be used for the camera network or the internet network. You can maybe come up with your company standard, like we're always going to use this card here for the camera network and this internal one for the corporate LAN, but it could be either one. Really doesn't matter. Your USB ports, a couple USB 3s, USB 2s. Again, you can plug in whatever you want to these. We ship them with the mouse and keyboard, so really doesn't matter. If you notice back here, we've got a DVI and an HDMI connector. You can use one or the other, but don't use both. And don't put two monitors on it. It's not designed to have two monitors on it. You'll get better, monitor support and stuff like that, I believe, through the HDMI. You don't have to buy an adapter for the DVI adapter, but only hook one monitor up to it. We have both outputs because this is like legacy stuff. You can plug an adapter in here and have a VGA on it for a monitor has a VGA on one. Or if you go HDMI to VGA, sometimes those adapters do weird stuff to the screen. They just look odd. So you're going to go VGA, do that one, HDMI, but only use one. Okay. And again, ships with mouse, manual, power cord, very simple. Now here's the system starting up, to give you an idea on boot up. So you'll get like this purple screen for, 10 or 15 seconds. And it'll flash black there showing some background processes running. And this, by the way, is not delayed or anything, like not sped up or anything. It's just, you know, is what it is. You power it up, that's what you see. You click on your Spectrum icon. And you then, that's the name of the system as it will appear from the factory. I think we keep these at admin 12345 is the built-in password. Please change them as soon as you get them. Okay, you can see that little dock pops out. And again, the interface is very, you know, you don't really have to worry about it that much. I mean, you know, you don't have to be afraid, oh, it's Linux. I got to know this. I got to know that. It works very, very much like Windows. And when Spectrum's running, there is no difference between a Cube or Cube LX. So one of the other things you want to do on setup is you want to go to the time clock. You should make sure your time zone is set right. If you're hooked up to the internet, you'll automatically have the time sync to you. So I'm on the East Coast, so we do New York, Eastern Standard Time. And there's no okay, there's no thing, whatever, you just close it. You know, that's it. You can change, like, you want to show the clock, you want to show how it looks, include week numbers, put the year on it up there. And I mean, then you're done. I mean, that's, you know, except for telling the cameras to start recording, that's the, you know, that's the interface. When you want to bring up cameras, I'm gonna, you know, I got 2 cameras logged in, they're looking about the same direction. You know, I can go over here, I can do my zoom window the same. Your playback function looks identical. And so on, you can take a, you know, a shot of that one. You can do your motion detection. We'll go over here. So this shows a new volume. I plugged in a USB drive. Let me go over here and do a smart search. Gonna find something to smart search on. There we go. We got a guy getting some exercise out here. All right. We choose the area, we right mouse button click, tell it to export. And here's the only part that's a little different, okay? Is we're gonna go in here, we're gonna name it, and then we gotta go tell it. Now, because of the way it works, there are no drive letters in Linux. There are only volumes, okay? So you gotta go in there and know where your volume, and right now it's gonna try to save it to the, you know, sort of the home folder for Spectrum. But we're gonna go in here, we know that thing's name is new volume. So we're gonna click here and there's a folder called media. And we're gonna say Cube LX and see new volume, and that's that spot where I was. I'm choosing that one. And I'm gonna export to that drive. And then I'm gonna show you over here, it'll actually appear in local files. And I can play that back, and it's got the watermarking on it, and it can be played back in anything. It's an MP4 file. And then there's my USB drive, and then there's that file. Okay, so again, that part is a tiny bit different than Windows. You know, you're not looking for, you know, you're plugging in your USB drive and, you know, looking for it, but that's really, you know, minor. You know, as far as that goes, and that's really the only one of the only differences in it. Now, here's where we're going to show you how to create a backup point. So we're going to create a backup in in Spectrum. So I'm going to close this out. There's my new volume I had plugged in. We're going to launch Spectrum. We're going to right mouse button click. We're going to go to server settings. And so, see, rather than having a C drive, D drive, whatever, they have their volumes named. So home 1, DW media, and that's where it's stored. That's the main storage. That's main 2 terabytes of storage. I plugged in my other drive, but you had noticed that's not triggered yet. And so I'm going to go over here and trigger that and activate that storage. Okay, now when I do, see, it's USB main, it's 500 gigs of storage, so it's not enough to be a full backup of that, but 500 gigs of storage. It is a USB drive. So I'm going to tell you, I do a training class, or used to do a training class before all this stuff went down, but and I would tell people, look, I'm plugging in a USB drive. Don't use that as a consistent backup drive, meaning if you have 2 terabytes of storage in here and you want a backup, better to get a 2 terabyte NAS and have it sit on the network side. NASs tend to be more reliable. USB, because their whole stack and the way they operate is all software driven, and you're relying on that end of it, the USB end of it, which is not as reliable as the TCP/IP stack on it. I would just tell you, if you're using a permanent backup plugin saying I'm going to have this data always backing up to this drive, I wouldn't use USB. Now, if you're going in and plugging in a USB drive saying, hey, I just got to back this thing up, get a bunch of data off of it, you can use a USB drive, obviously, for that as a transfer. So we'll just let this thing continue on. I've got this set as main storage, or I can set it, you see, I hit apply. Now it's got to make sure that it's going to go scan the drive, make sure it's acceptable, it doesn't have any bad sectors on it or whatever. And again, this is all like real time. So this is how long it'll take. 99.9% of the machines out there. Some of the ones with faster processors might not take as much time as this. So there, USB, ready to store. And now I'm going to go change it. I'm going to go change this to backup. I'm going to apply. Then I'm going to go into backup settings. And now in Spectrum, we have 3 different kinds of backups. You can set a schedule. You can do on demand, which is basically anything from when I hooked up this drive and started the backup backwards, I'm going to dump to that drive. So it's like a backup for, maybe the authorities have come in saying we want the data off this thing. You're like, well, what date? We want all of it, or something like that. The only backup I would do is real-time backup. Again, that's me, because I would want a copy of everything. So if something comes in, someone messes with the machine on site, you've got this backup. Could be in another room, could be in a ceiling somewhere, could be, closet somewhere else. And so everything up to the time they've stolen that box is backed up. So real-time backup to me. You can do a scheduled backup. You're doing it across a network and they've got limited bandwidth. So in the evening, they have more bandwidth. You can do a scheduled backup, but better to do a real-time backup. That's the backup that to me counts. That's a real backup. All right. So that's real time. We're going to choose our cameras. See, if I add any new cameras, it's going to automatically back those up. That's what that checkbox was. And I'm only going to back up the high-res stream just to save on a little hard drive space. And then anything happening in front of the camera that's a recording will then be also backed up to that drive at the same time. Okay? And the great thing about backups, whether they're created in Linux, whether they're created in Windows, you can take a laptop, whether it's Windows, mostly or Windows laptops, but a Linux box or whatever, take a backup created this way and play it back on any machine running Spectrum server and the Spectrum client. So the backups are fully portable. You don't need licenses for them. So again, the OS becomes a non-issue, okay? The OS that's running becomes a non-issue. You install the box, you do it. I mean, You guys who have gone out there and installed all these DVRs for years and embedded IP devices for years, those are all running a flavor of Linux. They're just, a lot of it stripped back, and they just have the controls you need for that. So you've actually been dealing with Linux for years. This is just your Linux desktop, more or less emulating Windows, okay? But I'm doing it with requiring a lot less hardware. So let's move on. So setup items, okay? So if you want to go in, setup, change appearance, behavior, you know, have that launcher bar there, your activity bar, change your security settings, display settings. You can do all that from there, okay? Now, there are times you'll have to run commands in Linux, and you can do all of them from the GUI, but a lot of them will work better, and you'll get more of a feel of how Linux works if you actually learn the command prompt. And you can do the command prompt by opening up that Finder on the side, type in CMD or TRM. There's a couple of other commands too. You can type in there, and it'll bring up this window, bring up your command prompt window. And we have support articles that'll say about uninstalling and reinstalling Spectrum if you needed to. So something happened to the machine, you needed to uninstall, reinstall Spectrum, you can do it from here. If you're on our higher end machines, like a machine running a RAID, okay, so an ERAC or a PRAC with RAID, there's full support in there for RAID and how to manage it under here and how to configure it and how to launch the RAID control information. So there are many commands that can be run. They can all be run from the GUI, just like Windows, or you can go out here and some of the commands are what's called sudo. Type in sudo space, and then you have your small install string, and it'll start installing or uninstalling Spectrum. But most can be done from the GUI, and as you see, with the way we have it set up, you really don't have to do anything unless lightning has struck this machine. All right. So another thing I want to talk to you about is Linux and UPSs. I want to make sure the system is protected and will perform for you. Okay. So I want you to make sure you have a UPS hooked up to it. And there are 3 companies that I found, and you know, I know we have some reps on the phone, and there's salespeople on the phone that don't sell these brands. And you guys may know of some other ones, but CyberPower, APC, and Eaton, there's software utilities out there that will work just like they do in Windows. The battery reaches 10 or 15% of thing. It'll actually shut the machine down cleanly. Then when power is restored, it'll bring it back up and manage it. So by all means, CyberPower, Eaton, or APC, there's bits of software out there that'll manage them. One is called APC UPSD, which is a piece of software to monitor the USB port for your UPS. And I think Minuteman and a few other ones have them too. But these are the ones I did some research on, and we've gotten tech calls in because I encourage everyone who purchases a system, whether it's Digital Watchdog system or another manufacturer system, to put a UPS on it. So, and use that software so this way power failures, you get power strikes. I mean, you know, I live in Florida, so I'm a little more sensitive to it because Tampa, Florida is pretty much 1 or 2 every year, the lightning strike capital of the world. We get a lot of power outages, mostly around North Tampa. And so having a UPS is key to keep, obviously, the system running, but also when the power comes back up and it gets that spike into the system, that can damage it. But the other thing that can damage the system, not having a UPS on it, and again, doesn't matter if it's running a Windows, Linux, it's embedded, whatever, is underpowered. So a lot of times, you know, you'll have the thing plug into an outlet, okay, even with the UPS, and if the UPS isn't what's called line interactive, what happens is if the mains drop, they don't just fall off completely, but the main voltage drops, let's say that, you know, 80 volts rather than 110 or 90 volts rather than 110, you're underpowering the device, and that can do as much damage as a spike, okay, because it causes the device to heat up, things not work right, and can actually create damage, especially on the bigger systems where you have a lot of hard drives and they're going to do a lot of draws. And we have some that have dual power supplies in them, and you got to keep all that in mind. So UPS, make sure you get one. And if you're Linux system, you don't have to do it. And I just got a comment in saying Minuteman has Linux support also. So there we go. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Digital Watchdog website. So Digital Watchdog, so operating around the Digital Watchdog website is very easy to find equipment. Let me just see if I can bring it up here. Just wanted to show you guys something. Where is it? Oh, I thought I had it running. Let's go over to Spectrum. Let's see. We open Chrome. So the DW website. So if you want to find out information, and by the way, I do this on my own, is I do type in new, and I can go in here and see all the new stuff we have coming out. Okay, because believe it or not, sometimes I don't know. And so we've got new panoramic cameras, new ball cameras, that. But if let's say I wanted to type in Linux, okay, find out what's going on with items with Linux. So DW adds OS option to Blackjack E-Racks. So it comes under press releases, or I can do a model number cube, and I can bring up cube LX. And there we go. And I can go list of part numbers. I can go down here and look at my part numbers, 18 terabytes of storage. Options, this for the licensing numbers, documentation, all that stuff on our website. So by all means, go visit it, check it out. Make sure it has what you need. Pretty much, we've been working on it very hard. So this thing is very complete now. Has a lot of information on it. It has, of course, all our webinars in it, stuff like that. We also have a support website. So if I go back to that page, click on here, and we double click on support, you can go in here and type in what you want. Actually, so we have some already top articles. Some people have been updating TeamViewer on Ubuntu, Windows 7 boot issues, something going on with Windows. But we have analog cameras, Blackjack series, so camera network setup, deciding the camera subnet, the setup process, where to plug it in. So this one tells you to plug in PoE switch here, and your internet router here. Really doesn't matter. And of course, you put in your IP address, subnet mask and gateway. Type it in. All you got to do is click add, type it all in, and you're done. And there's a little button on the bottom that says save. And you've got your camera network set up, and then you do DHCP or a static IP for the corporate network side. Also, I want to remind you guys, all our products are NDAA compliant, which means we meet with the John McCain National Defense Authorization Act. So allows you, there's a lot of federal money floating around, and that federal money is tied to the products you're using and who manufactures them, where you're manufacturing them. So just make sure your stuff's on the NDAA list. We have that on our site. You can go to our support page and type in NDAA or TAA. And also on each page, we'll see a little icon like this. They'll say NDAA and TAA compliant. So keep that in mind. And then, of course, we have our Digital Watchdog webinar page. So as I said before, we'll have these posted among others. We have our system design one. We have CAS. We have VMAX A1, and plus our Works With series. So there's all the stuff about video analytics and items like that, access control, Doorbird, which are commercial grade, multi-tenant doorbells, all right, and stuff like that. We also have our Spectrum certification. So the DW University, we have online training. It's an 8-hour course. And we're adding stuff to it. So right now it's our 8-hour Spectrum course, but we're going to add other stuff, including some information, in-depth information on what's going on with 4.1 and the differences on 4.1 and how to do some of our integrations. So keep that in mind. Now I'm going to open this up to Q&A. So if you've got